Hello and welcome to the Crimson Misery Podcast, episode 32. My name is Will Rainbolt. I hope you all are doing well. It is February 20th, 2025. If you are listening on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts, consider rating the show 5 stars. And if you are listening on YouTube, like, subscribe, comment down below. I also want to welcome any new listeners, especially after my interview with Emma Vigeland of The Majority Report and ESPN. Really appreciate her joining the podcast for an interview. It was a great conversation, so if you have not yet seen it, I would highly recommend you check it out. And again, can't thank her enough for that. And also consider subscribing to The Majority Report and ESPN. They are currently on hiatus, but whenever they are back for the NFL season, it is very much worth a watch. So, with that being said, for college basketball from here on out, now that it's approaching late February and there are only a few weeks left in the college basketball season, I am going to be focusing a little more on the bracketology, especially on the men's side. I'm not a women's bracketology expert, but I also do have like a pretty good knowledge of what teams are primed to get 1 seeds and what teams still need some work to do and whatnot. But for the most part, it'll be on the men's side in that regard at the very least, but I obviously still want to cover the women's side because it's still college basketball, you know? So, and we have a lot to get to. I also, later in the show, I want to talk about, historically speaking, the worst 1 seeds, or not 1 seeds, but preseason number 1s that have suddenly just face planted. And this is a very timely subject because of how the Kansas Jayhawks are currently playing and how really in back-to-back seasons, I'll get into that in a little bit, but it's very timely for how Kansas preseason number 1 has just played terribly as of late. And I'll get into that especially once I talk about the Kansas at BYU game. I obviously want to start off on Monday with Duke just blowing out Virginia. It really was not close at any point in this game. Cooper Flagg with another double-double, 17 points, 14 rebounds. Still looks like the number 1 overall pick in this year's NBA draft. And Virginia just did not have enough offense in this one. And Virginia, of course, just kind of in a transition period with Ron Sanchez as interim head coach, replacing the great Tony Bennett. And this matchup, this result really was not surprising considering how really, really good Duke is and how really bad Virginia is. A little bit of a scary moment when Malik Brown ended up going out with an injury, and hoping that he's going to be okay. Dislocated shoulder. He's already dealt with some injuries, I know, and it is going to be a bit of a bummer. But they still have a lot of talent. They have a big game, out of conference game against Illinois in Madison Square Garden, I believe, and that's going to be a really, really good game to watch, especially because this is now an Illinois team that is they're in the tournament currently, but especially with the way they've been playing recently, Illinois has to get going, and a win against Duke would be quite the statement to make. And because right now, aside from at North Carolina, Duke I don't think is losing any other game this in this ACC with how bad it is. So Duke again with another really good win, and then Arizona going on the road as well and beating Baylor 74-67. I thought that Baylor, especially with how VJ Edgecombe's been playing and with Robert Wright potentially honing in his performance against Kansas, I thought that Baylor would have enough firepower to defeat a very inconsistent Arizona team with a lot of talent, granted, and it did not come to fruition, that prediction. So Arizona wins 74-67, number 19 Arizona. I think Baylor, with how inconsistent they've been this year, right now, I think if I had to say they're probably a 9 or a 10 seed right now. I think Joe Lunardi has them as a 9, but this is a win you probably needed to pick up, especially against Arizona, especially because it's another quad 1 game at home. But Arizona with another really good win. So this, I think, moves them to probably the 5 line if I had to guess. Maybe maybe a 6, but I don't really see them much higher than that right now, just because of how poor they played in their non-conference schedule. That is the sort of thing that gives me pause for Arizona. Still a really talented squad. Joe Lunardi has them as a 3, and I can understand that based off their non-conference schedule, or not based off their conference schedule. Sorry, they did play a tough non-conference, and I get that. Strength of schedule wise, I can see that, and results wise, I just don't know. And a 3 seed to me would be pretty high for Arizona right now, but still, they have a lot of talent. If Caleb Love can find his range again, that would help a lot. I just don't know right now if they're exactly on the 3 line. A 4 seed, 5 seed maybe. 6 is probably where I would have them right now, but that's just because I'm not as convinced on Arizona as a lot of other people are. And I get it. Again, I totally get it. With their level of talent, I can see them making a run, but I'm very cautious about picking Arizona because I've been burned by them in the past, especially under Tommy Lloyd. They're a team that really, until they've proven they can make a deep run, I'm always going to have some reservations on that. So, and then a couple other conference, mid-major conference races, some games that happened. McNeese beat Southeast Louisiana 88-82. So that's another big win for McNeese, who is now 15-1 in the Southland. McNeese, I think, probably a 12, 13 seed, perhaps. That's another team that if you're playing them come tournament time, that's definitely you're definitely cringing if you're on the 5 or 4 line and you see them pop up next to your name on Selection Sunday. So, and then Kansas State, pretty much the last couple of games they've had their tournament hopes extinguished. Even though, again, Lunardi has them as the next 4 out alongside Indiana and Xavier and UC Irvine. And I'll get to some of the last 4 and first 4 out teams, but for right now, Kansas State, who was playing a lot better in Big 12 play, has not played very well in the last couple of games. So that pretty much is for a team that really was playing their hearts out against teams like Kansas and Arizona, really, and also Iowa State as well. They've definitely fallen back to earth here in the last couple days. So moving on to Tuesday, and a couple wins for top 5 teams that definitely solidify their top 2 seed line, especially for Florida, who is currently, I would have them as a number 1 seed. They defeated Oklahoma 85-63, especially when Walter Clayton having another very, very good shooting night at 18 points, 4 of 7 from 3, really just beating an Oklahoma team that is fallen off a cliff seemingly once SEC play started. All 10 of their losses are in conference play, and yet Joe Lunardi still has them as their last 4 in at 16-10. So something that I definitely have some problems with, especially when you're leaving a team like VCU out of the tournament. I would have VCU over both Oklahoma and Arkansas right now. Wake Forest, a little bit more of a question mark there. I would have Wake Forest in the tournament, but Oklahoma and Arkansas I would probably have out at this current moment, as is Georgia also out for Lunardi. But And if you look at other bracketologists like Jerry Palm or Andy Katz, perhaps. I get it. I just think Joe Lunardi is. I don't agree with everything Joe Lunardi, but I at least when it comes to being consistent, I think Joe Lunardi is one of the better bracketologists out there. But at the same time, I don't agree with every single one of his takes. That's for sure. So, but Florida definitely with another big win by 22 points. Not the kind of loss you want to have for Oklahoma, but you at least wanted to show, like, at least lose. If you're going to lose by like single digits. I know it's tough against a top two team, but at the same time, this is an Oklahoma team that's currently fighting for their postseason lives, so probably needed a better showing. So, and then Houston wins on the road against Arizona State, 80-65. LJ Cryer, 18 points, 6 assists. Houston just has a lot of size. They have a lot of this offense is a lot more fluid than in the past couple seasons under Kelvin Sampson, and so that's why I feel a little bit better about this Houston team. I would probably have them on the 2 line as well, as maybe if there is a path for Houston though to get a 1 seed, but you're also having to leapfrog a team like Duke or another SEC team like Florida or maybe Alabama at this point. So maybe after it really does depend on what happens this weekend, but Alabama losing, and I'll get to that game in a moment. But Houston definitely has a case for a 1 seed, especially 14-1 in the Big 12. They have the inside track on the Big 12 regular season. So if they're able to win that conference, they are looking at they're looking as a lock for at least a 2 seed right now. So another big win for them, winning on the road against a pretty bad Arizona State team. So that is that. And then Texas A&M also competing for the 2 seed, loses on the road against Mississippi State. Not only loses on the road, but really just did not have a good showing. That's the reservation I have with a team like Texas A&M, because Wade Taylor, especially when he's not shooting the ball that well, and overall just takes Texas A&M out of their offensive rhythm. And Mississippi State, despite all of their struggles in conference play, and they've had a lot, but they are now 7-6. They're playing some of their best basketball in their last few games, and they look a lot better now. And great home win, especially against a quad 1, a top 2 seed coming into this game. Texas A&M might be bumped down to the 3 line potentially. It's hard to knock a team, especially losing on the road against a ranked opponent, but at the same time, they definitely, in terms of, especially in their second half offense, did not have a lot of good moments. So Josh Hubbard had another great game at 25 points, and one of the more underappreciated SEC players. We'll see come tournament time how he's able to do in the tournament, especially with RJ Melendez and Cameron Matthews by his side. But again, for Texas A&M, they have a really, really good team. They have wins over Purdue, and obviously a road win against Missouri, who I'll talk about in a moment. But at the same time, I do have a little bit of reservations about Texas A&M. I think they'll make it. They can definitely make the Sweet 16, I think. They have enough talent to certainly do that. And I can also see them potentially getting upset in the round of 32. I could definitely see that. But until that time happens, for a lot of those matchups, we're going to have to see who the selection committee ends up pairing them with. So we'll see. Iowa State as well, another Big 12 team with Houston, wins at home against a very bad Colorado team, 79-65. Iowa State also competing for the 2 seed. They might have leapfrogged A&M in that. If they are both on the 2 line, definitely Iowa State would be a higher 2 seed right now. They definitely were not playing very well without Milan Momcilovic, but now that he is back, I think Iowa State has a bit more depth, and now their offensive rhythm can start to take hold, and because of that, they do look a lot better. And I could definitely see Iowa State making another second weekend run, obviously, with how much talent they have. But at the same time, if they have another injury like they did with Momcilovic, it can be pretty difficult to overcome that. Because especially how they looked on the road against Kansas and at home against Kansas State, they definitely have had some letdown games. But I just sometimes can't look past how good their offense can look at times this year. And that's kind of at the forefront of my mind when I'm thinking of what teams are deserving of a top 2 seed. And I look at that. I look at the really great games they've played this year, and yes, they have had some injuries, but at full strength, and especially down the stretch where they do still have some tough games remaining, and especially in the Big 12 tournament, never quite know what can happen there. I think Iowa State, they were a 2 seed last year. I think they're probably like that now. I don't think they're a 1 seed, especially not on the same level as Florida and Auburn right now. Duke, maybe, but at the same time, I think Duke, I would still take over them. And then the question is for that final 1 seed, it's between probably right now, it's probably between Houston and Alabama. And right now, I would take Houston. And so we'll see. I think a game that will be deciding a lot is 2 days from now with Iowa State traveling to Houston at 2 o'clock. That's going to be a really, really fun game to watch. And then they also have Arizona at home. That's a game they would love to avenge, I'm sure. But then they also have BYU at home, and BYU has shown that they are all really they can shoot the lights out in many games they play this year, especially against Kansas, and then they have to go on the road to Kansas State, who already beat them. So that's going to decide a lot for Iowa State, and especially whether or not they get a 2. A team that I thought was definitely playing into a 2 seed. Right now I would have them as a 3, but they did not do themselves any favors. Texas Tech losing at TCU 69-66. It was definitely a game that I thought Texas Tech would win, but at the same time, hats off to TCU for keeping that lead at halftime and then overcoming a late rally by Texas Tech and got a big home win. They're still not in the tournament, TCU, and I think they're pretty much, unless they run the table, I don't think have much of a shot. But for Texas Tech, they have definitely had some ups and downs this season, and this is definitely one of the downs, despite 21 from Darian Williams and Chance McMillan having another really good game at 19 points. This 5 for 8 for Texas Tech from the free throw line, and then 15 of 22 for TCU at the free throw line, so you can make a bit of an argument that TCU definitely got a little bit lucky at the free throw line, but at the same time, this is a game that Texas Tech probably should have won regardless of that, but I get it. It's tough to win a game on the road when the officiating and the foul shots are not really on your side. Does this do much for Texas Tech's resume? Does it hurt the resume that much? Probably not. So I'd still have them on the 3 line. At worst, they're probably a 4 right now. But we'll see. We'll see how they end up playing at the end of the year. But a team that really did not need to lose as badly as they did on Tuesday was Illinois. Wisconsin's a really good team. Wisconsin's a very good team. Trust me, as an Indiana fan who the men's basketball team has not won at Wisconsin since 1998. I get it. All right, playing at Wisconsin's really difficult. But for an Illinois team that is currently in free fall mode after starting the year so well, and now we're basically stuck with, oh crap, we are 17-10 now. We are playing ourselves out of potentially a top 9 seed at this point. I think they're probably on the 9 line right now, and losing by 21 against Wisconsin is not going to help. John Tonje with 31 points, another one of my favorite Big Ten players this year. And for Illinois, especially with guys like Kaspers Jakuchonis and Ben Hammerkaus, and especially with the emergence of that's the thing. The emergence of Will Riley has been so fun to see. I love watching him play, especially now that he's sort of figured out his role on the team. And I think as he continues to play more, I think he's only going to get more comfortable. And at the same time, I'm like, this Illinois team still cannot shoot the ball to save their lives. And they take so many 3-pointers as well. And they're not good at hitting 3-pointers. And so obviously we saw that against Michigan State, right? They had negative 2 points in the final 7 minutes. And that's not that's not even a joke. That's literally what happened. Like they took 2 points away from Illinois in the Michigan State game. It didn't matter, and it was still just funny to see. And then you have this effort against Wisconsin, and yeah, I mean, again, as I said earlier in this podcast, Illinois plays Duke in Madison Square Garden next. Win against Duke, and I think they're pretty much in. But you lose that game, and you're losing to one of the best teams in the country on a neutral court. Ordinarily, that doesn't do much for your in terms of hurting your tournament resume, but it's still a lack of a very good victory. I mean, they've lost to Tennessee at home. Tennessee also playing for another one of the number 1 seeds right now. They're on the 2 line for me, but still, I just don't get why this Illinois team struggles so much in game. This game I can understand. And even looking back on it, with losses they've had to Maryland, for instance. I get it now because Maryland's a really good team, but then they've had losses to Nebraska and Rutgers on the road. And then they lost at home to USC, who is not very good this year. And they also lost at Northwestern. Granted, Northwestern was healthy whenever Northwestern ended up beating them, but at the same time, looking at their resume right now, and they do have a win against Wisconsin. They did have a win at number 9 Oregon at the time. Oregon playing a little bit better right now. They have a win against Ohio State and UCLA, who I'll talk about in a little bit. But that being said, there aren't they don't have a ton of eye-popping victories, and that's definitely not going to serve them very well come tournament time. And if they keep this downward spiral going, I still think Illinois right now is in the tournament, but I could see Illinois being a 10 seed potentially, maybe even an 11 if this keeps going the way that I think it's going to be going, which is kind of scary for other teams in that region, because Illinois has a lot of talent. That's the thing. They are a very talented team. I just don't think the game plan fits them all that well, especially with how much they shoot threes. So we'll see. Maybe I'm a bit more doomy on Illinois. Maybe it's just that seeing them brick a ton of threes against Michigan State, who I will get to right now, that makes me a bit weary on them. But at the same time, they have the potential to turn this around. And Michigan State, on the other hand, after beating Purdue, pretty much puts Purdue in the back burner for the Big Ten title race. And boy, Michigan State was running all over them. They looked completely out-hustled at nearly every single turn. And Jackson Kohler's continuing, like the emergence of Jackson Kohler from even like just a couple seasons ago at Michigan State. It's been pretty impressive to see, and we'll see if he can keep this up because right now he has added. I mean, since he's added the 3-point shot to his game, he's shooting so much better from the free throw line than he was his first couple of years, and also compare that with like superb athletes like Cohen Carr and Jeremy Fears Jr. and Jace Richardson. So many guys that can go out and get you a bucket. And then obviously with the other bigs like Carson Cooper and Frankie Fiddler, all of those guys compared as a team under Tom Izzo is really, really dangerous. And it's a very bad matchup for Purdue, especially because they don't have a lot of interior defense. I mean, they had to try to play Will Berg for some of the game, and it didn't really work out very well. But yeah, Purdue still like is a really good offensive team and has a lot of good guard play. But with the inconsistencies of guys like C.J. Cox and Jakari Harris and Camden Heide, if those guys can start to play a little bit better and are at least a little more consistent, then Purdue is a really difficult team to play. But against Michigan State, because they have so much front court depth and because they have a really good transition fast break offense that has really gotten better throughout the year, and because at the start of this year that was almost invisible, except with guys like Cohen Carr, who has remained a really, really good athlete. He reminds me of Brendan Dawson for Michigan State from I think it was 2011 to 2015 was when he played for the Spartans. He really reminds me of him a lot. Just a fantastic athlete. And Michigan State gets the job done at home. Right now, I would have Purdue maybe on the 4 line and Michigan State on the 3, maybe also a 4. But I would have Michigan State ahead of Purdue right now at least. But especially with Michigan in pole position, same with Michigan State. That is another very interesting game. I mean, they have a couple of games especially for Michigan State. They have to go to Michigan, and then they have to go to Maryland, who is emerging as one of the better teams in the Big Ten. Then they have a home game against Wisconsin, and then at Iowa, which Iowa just is completely gone from the tournament field right now, and then at home against Michigan. That is a lot that is still yet to be decided. And the Big Ten's going to, especially the top of the Big Ten, is going to continue to beat each other up. And that's going to decide where a lot of teams go and where a lot of teams are seated. So we'll see. We shall see. Don't have a ton to say about Marquette defeating Seton Hall, but Marquette needed this win for their Big East tournament resume. Right now, I'd have Marquette on like the 4 or 5 line, just because the Big East is not all that good this year, aside from St. John's, aside from Creighton, UConn. Just really nothing too much else to really talk about. Xavier as well, although it is interesting that Joe Lunardi has them as the next 4 out, which I get, but. With that said, though, Marquette's still a really good team with a lot of talent. With the last couple of years, it's like I'm hesitant to really, like, especially without Tyler Kolek, that's going to really be difficult for Marquette, I think, to make a really deep run come tournament time. We'll see, though. The Big East does have a lot of wins to offer for Marquette, especially because, let's see, when do they play? Because I know they play UConn again, but it's not loading for some reason. Okay, well, I'll get to that, I guess, in a little bit, or maybe not now. This is great podcasting, by the way. Love whenever that happens. They do, yes. They play UConn again on the road, and then they finish the regular season against St. John's. So they still have some wins to pick up, but they also have games against Villanova, Providence, and Georgetown. all of whom are, pretty mediocre this year. So with that said, we also have UConn, who really had another just putrid first half against Villanova after losing to Seton Hall, one of the worst losses on the entire year for any team in the tournament field right now. But UConn ended up, like, Liam McNeely, I mean, when he plays well, he's basically Marquette's entire offense aside from solo ball. And that, like, when those two especially get going offensively, like, UConn is pretty difficult to beat, especially because they move so well without the ball, especially, with Terrace Reed. uh, I mean, I know he got hurt, but at the same time, he made some really big plays down the stretch, finished with 13. And obviously, McNeely scored 20. He also had 38 against Creighton. But, I mean, again, I look at guys like Alex Caraban, who have been struggling so much throughout the year. Another game where he went 0 for 3 from 3, had 6 points. Alex Caraban needs to step it up big time if UConn wants to make a run. And I mean, unranked right now, probably on the 7 or 8 line right now for UConn. But at the same time, if those guys aren't scoring and they can't rely on their defense to stop better teams, then it's a really, really big problem that UConn is going to be facing come tournament time, especially with the lack of interior defense, especially with teams shooting a blazing amount from three seemingly every other night. And that's going to be a problem. That's going to be a big problem for UConn. So, like, let's take for example, with where they're seated right now. So, as of right now, UConn is going to be facing Ohio State. Okay, so Ohio State has a lot of really good 3-point shooters, especially for John Mobley and God, where? Oh my gosh, Bruce Thornton. I was like, I couldn't think of Bruce Thornton's name for some reason. But yes, Bruce Thornton, Devin Royal, and they also have. I mean, even though he hasn't been playing as well, I mean, they still have Aaron Bradshaw, the Kentucky transfer, who, like, it's still going to be a problem if UConn faces a team like Ohio State. That's going to be another game where I look at that and I'm like, well, those three guards who are really good shooters, and especially Bruce Thornton, who can get a bucket at seemingly every single angle, that's going to prove to be a matchup headache for a UConn team that just does not defend very well. And I think that if that matchup, say, were to happen, that's a very dangerous matchup for UConn right now. And it can be fixed, especially if guys like Caravan get going, if McNeely can have like a 30-point game again. But at the same time, that's another matchup where in my head I'm like, well, Ohio State definitely would probably have the edge in that one. So that is the reservation I have on this particular UConn team, especially, as I've said before, without Donovan Clingan. It's been really tough because Samson Johnson and Terrace Reed are not the greatest interior defenders of all time, and that's such a lack of front court depth that can definitely eat teams alive come tournament time. So that is why I just have such a difficult time with what to do with this UConn squad, because they have so much talent. They really do. And they are, despite Dan Hurley making them as unlikable as possible, they are well coached. But it's just such a hesitation that I have trying to make sure, like, what do I do with UConn? Like, how far should I have them go once the bracket comes out? That's the problem I have with it. So anyway, but this game, on the other hand, is something that I will get to in a little bit with the worst preseason number one teams in recent memory, especially the ones that I'm aware of, and especially with confirming it from research and from my own, like, photographic memory when it comes to this. BYU, who is, I think, in the last four byes, they blew the doors off a just seemingly uninspired Kansas team right now. Look, I've talked about this before. Hunter Dickinson is just not the savior. And I think Kansas fans are well aware of that by now. And they just need a reset. They need to get themselves away from the Hunter Dickinson, KJ Adams era of Kansas basketball. Back-to-back round of 32 exits after winning it all in 2022. Because a performance like this, especially, I mean, since BYU joined the Big 12, they're 2-0 against Kansas. And again, Kansas just looked absolutely uninspired. They looked lost on a lot of offensive possessions. They were out hustled on the defensive end. BYU was getting offensive rebound after offensive rebound. They had 10 offensive rebounds in this game against a team that has KJ Adams, Flory Bidunga, and Hunter Dickinson seemingly as their better interior defenders. He started all three. Bill Self started all three of them, and they were still giving up like so many rebounds. They were unable to rebound their own missed shots, and they were missing a lot in this game. And BYU, a team that shoots so many three-pointers, as they did last year under Mark Pope, they shot a lot of threes this game, and so many of them went in. And 14 of 36 overall. Richie Saunders had a fantastic game for BYU, 22 points. He was like every time he threw one up, it was just in like he was going in. And Mewat Mogg for the transfer from Rutgers had 13 points. And yeah, the epitome of this game was whenever Dajuan Harris came off like a curl route and he got a wide open 3-pointer and the ball went between the rim and the side of the backboard on the wing from the right side. And that was like one of the ugliest shots I've ever seen. Oh, wow. Yeah, went 0 for 5 overall, Dajuan Harris did. And then Hunter Dickinson went 5 of 13 from the floor. He is 7-2, by the way. God. I mean, I'm not shedding a tear for Hunter Dickinson. I'm just like, it's just like eye rolling that, like, yes, I get it. He's a double-double machine. He's really tall. And that doesn't mean he's a good interior defender and is still, like, missing so many shots around the rim regardless. Like I'm sorry, Fran Fraschilla. He's not very good. He's not the savior that Kansas needs. Like, they just need to get away from that era. And, like, I mean, Bill Self has had some really lackluster years at Kansas. Obviously, 2 national titles. Obviously had that great run to start his tenure at Kansas where he had, like, 12 or 13 consecutive Big 12 regular season titles. I understand. I understand that. Right now, he's a little bit behind. He's fallen behind. And we've seen that the last couple of years with Kansas. Ranked preseason number 1, and each time they have fallen off. And I'll get to that. I'll get to some of the worst ones historically in a little bit and talk about it a little more in depth. But for right now, I just wanted to mention some of the mid-majors. Akron is now 13-0 in the MAC after defeating Northern Illinois 73-63. Northern Illinois not able to play Notre Dame, so they ended up losing this one. That's a football joke, by the way. Yeah, so Minnesota wins on the road against UCLA 64-61, especially after UCLA beat Indiana. This is a very big surprising one. Ben Johnson, not the now head coach of the Chicago Bears, but the head coach of the Minnesota Golden Gophers men's basketball team, is coaching for his job pretty much, even though Minnesota's not a tournament team. I don't know if you can really do much better than Ben Johnson right now. But Dawson Garcia had 32 points. It's going to be sad to see him leave the Big Ten, but I definitely think Dawson Garcia is probably a second-round draft pick, if I had to guess. He does so much, and he had 32 for them. winning on the road against UCLA. That was very surprising, and that definitely does hurt UCLA quite a bit, especially this being a game they should have won. Definitely, I definitely think that probably bumps UCLA down a seed from I think maybe a 7 to about an 8 if I had to make a projection just based off their schedule. Yeah, right. Oh, right now, huh? Right now, Lenardi has them as a 6. That's high. That's definitely a little high for me, especially after they lost to Minnesota. But then another mid-major, San Diego State defeated Fresno State 83-60. Right now they're on the last four in for Lenardi, so that's another big win for them. They need to keep winning because even just one slip up will definitely have their NCAA tournament hopes in question. So need to keep winning. Need to keep winning. So with that being said, let's move to Wednesday's action. Auburn, number one overall seed right now. Despite the earlier loss to Florida, they've been playing really well since then, especially after beating Alabama on the road. They had a struggle with Arkansas, though. Arkansas had the lead late in this one, but Janai Broome just kept hitting some big shots down the stretch. And especially when you got, again, I know he has some emotional problems, but Chad Baker-Mazara, still really good off the bench, had 15 points. Chaney Johnson, 14 points. Not a great game from either Denver Jones or Miles Kelly, who I think need to have better shooting nights come tournament time. But right now, Auburn still looks really good. And Arkansas, despite not having Boogie Fland, again, out for the year, they definitely put up a pretty good fight. But one of the crazier stats in this one is Zvonimir Ivisic went 0 for 10 from the floor, 0 for 9 from 3. Whew, that's bad. That's really bad. And again, Arkansas, another team that's playing for their tournament lives. They are currently in the last four in. I don't agree with that. I don't think Arkansas is in the tournament right now. Even like if they won this game, like yes, they would obviously be in. But if they lost this game, I don't really think that changes a ton. I think they were out of the tournament before this game. I still think they're out of the tournament now. They just they have some good wins this year, but it's just not 15-11 right now. They still have a lot of work to do. I think they're in over Georgia right now, but that isn't really saying much. Like I'd put them ahead of Georgia, but I would put VCU ahead of Arkansas, essentially, is what I'm saying. And obviously, as I said before, like Oklahoma is the same way. SMU, definitely, I would have still out of the tournament, but that's just because the ACC is really bad, and that definitely affects their strength of schedule. So, but again, Auburn did more than enough this year, has done more than enough this year, and they still have some challenging games, but especially against Alabama, who, oh my God, this is one of the crazier games of the year so far. Not just because it didn't have it was like an anticlimactic ending, but Mark Sears had 35 points for Alabama. Of the 98 points that they scored, Alabama scored 98 points this game. So you think that they, probably won this game. No. And this game did not go into overtime. They gave up 110 points. 110 points to Missouri. Granted, Missouri is one of the best transition offenses in the country this year. One of the best I've seen in a while. That's how good they are. And Dennis Gates has built this team up from the transfer portal with guys like Mark Mitchell and Tony Perkins and Tamar Bates, former IU guy. Like, this is a Missouri team that defensively, is there a bit to be desired? Yes. Yes, there is. But, Alabama is that good of an offense. Alabama has one of the worst defenses I've ever seen. And that's I don't even care if you're facing one of the better teams in the country. Giving up 110 points without overtime is just wild. I mean, that's almost unheard of. And Caleb Grill, 25 points in this one. Mark Mitchell had 31 points. God, when you have a guy like Caleb Grill coming off the bench providing 25 points is nuts. And he had other start like Tony Perkins had 10, Tamar Bates with 13, Anthony Robinson also had a couple threes. This Missouri team is loaded with shooters, and they have front court depth too. That's the other thing that other Missouri teams in the past have been missing, especially when they were a 2 seed in 2012 and they lost to Norfolk State. Like they, I mean, they had Ricardo Ratliff, of course, but you know, aside from that, you had like Steve Moore coming off the bench, and that Missouri team just did not have any depth. And so when they faced a team with actual front court size like Kyle O'Quinn, they lost. And so like this year, Missouri, however, has obviously Mark Mitchell, they Josh Gray, and I mean other guys can really step up, can play the four, play the three, and can provide some shot blocking. They have a lot of length, they have a lot of athleticism, and this Missouri team is really really scary to see. And they got off to like a 12-0 lead. Alabama also has not led for the last 80 minutes. They've played basketball like against Auburn at home and then now at Missouri. Both Auburn and Missouri have led Alabama wire to wire. So that is definitely concerning. So Alabama, I think, pretty much is off the one line, at least for the moment. They are still incredibly talented. I've said a lot about their depth, and they bring a lot of really good players off the bench, and they have star power in the starting lineup, especially with Sears, especially with LeBaron Philon, who had one of the better games for Alabama in this one. But I'm just like, again, they made a Final Four run last year. They can easily make a Final Four run this year. That defense is putrid. I literally, like, again, in a lot of modern basketball, defense often like sometimes it can be like left behind a little bit. Like Miami was one of the worst defensive teams in 2023 in the Power Five, and they made the Final Four. So like, who really knows, right? But still a pretty piss poor effort from Alabama, and so that's just one thing that I'm sort of like considering if they get matched up with a team that can equate them in athleticism and also can bring up some depth and off the bench. That's what really concerns me about Alabama. So, but again, that was a crazy shooting performance that Missouri ended up putting on. So, and again, if you're not aware of how good Missouri is, now you know. Like they're probably on the 4 line right now, and I could see them easily working their way up to a 3 if they keep winning. So, St. John's, another team that is around the 3 to 4 line right now. I would say uh, at worst maybe a 5, given because the Big East, as I said before, just not as good. But they did pick up a very good quad 2 win at DePaul, 82-58. That does a lot for their metrics, and and on paper as well. And the eye test also proved that they looked pretty good. 4 starters in double figures, including Kadari Richmond with 17. I really, really like St. John's a lot. The question remains is, can their offense, can their 3-point shooting be a little bit better come tournament time? But I remember this is Rick Pitino, who took sub 35% 3-point shooting teams from Louisville to the Final Four in back-to-back years and won the 2013 national title. That has since been vacated. Both of those banners have been vacated. So anyway, not too much else to say there. DePaul just not very good. Otherwise, maybe one day for DePaul. Vanderbilt also definitely more so on the bubble. Last 4 buys currently is where Joe Lunardi has them. Lost by 21 on the road to Kentucky. So Kentucky avenges the earlier defeat to Vanderbilt. And I mean, they looked better than they did against Texas. They're still without Lamont Butler. When they get Lamont Butler back, that is going to make them so much better. But without him, like, they still have a really good team. Otega Owe, another just absolutely fantastic athlete, and can do pretty much. He's a multifaceted type player, and I really think that this Kentucky team, I think, is better than last year's, especially like defensively. I think, even though they're inconsistent, granted, I just think, like, for some reason I have a little bit more trust in this Kentucky team to make a deeper run. And look, it depends on if Kobe Brea is able to be more consistent shooting the basketball, and if other guys can step up. Travis Perry has done a decent job. He's not Lamont Butler, I get it, but they also definitely they obviously need Lamont Butler back, and I forget also. Wait, who else got who else is out currently? Jackson Robinson. Yeah, Jackson Robinson also currently out, averaging 13 points per game. And if he's back, and if Lamont Butler gets back, I think Kentucky can have a really, really, really good tournament run, because they are really, really talented. And so, yeah, did not play today. They didn't need him, but yeah, this team, once they get healthy, is going to be pretty good. So, big win for Kentucky, especially against Vanderbilt, who is, fighting for their tournament lives, as I said. So there is that. And then a couple other games I wanted to get to before I move on. North Carolina got a big win for their tournament resume. Still not in the tournament for me, but they won 97-73 against NC State, who's just not very good this year. So they needed a win. They need any win they can get at this point. So I think if North Carolina is able to beat Duke, that will pretty much decide whether or not they make the tournament. That is pretty much their play-in game, I think. Even though, like, they need to still win games in this conference that against teams that aren't very good. Can they do it? Sure. Is it likely for me? Probably not, but we'll see. We shall see. Drake bounces back after they lost to Bradley. They defeated UIC 74-57. So Drake now 14-3 in the Missouri Valley. Bradley, speaking of which, lost to Illinois State. So, man, I was like really hoping Bradley would bounce back, or would keep this momentum going against Drake, or since they played Drake, and nope, definitely was not the case. So then Oregon may have clinched a tournament berth against Iowa, winning by 2 on the road against Iowa. Look, I was just, especially without Owen Freeman, they just they hemorrhage so many points. And then Oregon especially, they're not even that great of an offensive team, but especially with Nate Biddle having a double-double, having 21 points, 10 rebounds. Oregon can still, like, especially against teams that are a little bit undersized, they can still, like, they can do some damage, I feel like. They have some really good wins this year, and I know they haven't played very well. I'm still not quite sure what their guards do most of the time I watch Oregon, but at the same time, that was a pretty good effort from Oregon. So that pretty much clinched the tournament berth for me, as I said. And then Gonzaga winning on the road 84-63 against Washington State. Gonzaga still, right now, let's see here. Gonzaga is currently an 8 seed, so that's right now they're scheduled to play Utah, or they're projected to play Utah State, who beat San Jose State 105-57. That's a big metric win for Utah State. Keeps them a game back of New Mexico, who lost to Boise State on the road. So New Mexico, that opens the door a little bit for Utah State, even though they don't play New Mexico again that is still a bit of a surprising result, even though Boise State is 10-5 in the Mountain West. But that definitely knocks New Mexico down a little bit. I still think both New Mexico and Utah State are at larges. Same with San Diego State right now, anyway. But both Utah State and New Mexico have a lot longer of a leash. And then St. Mary's 79-66 over Portland, now 14-1 in the West Coast Conference. They looks like they're gonna pull ahead for good in the the West Coast Conference. So really happy. I genuinely want someone else other than Gonzaga to win that conference, and I think this year is definitely the year for it. Yeah. So with that being said, let's move on. For the past 3 seasons, the preseason number one has been not very good, and going back, we have let's do the so North Carolina was preseason number one in 2022-23. That was the year after they made the national championship game, the year after they ended Mike Krzyzewski's tenure at Duke. And I really it was so strange for me to see a team struggle that badly. And I just, yeah, it really did not make any sense whatsoever that North Carolina would struggle that much, especially with Baycott, especially with R.J. Davis and Caleb Love. But they didn't even make the tournament. They didn't. They had an NIT bid and declined it. So that was, that was one of the worst one seeds. It's hard to get worse than that. A team that just did not even make the tournament after being preseason number one. That's almost unheard of. What I think is a little bit more embarrassing is a team. Again, North Carolina. Granted, that's tough. That's very, very tough pill to swallow, with so many expectations, and it's sort of carried over to today, where Hubert Davis is definitely, his job security is not all that great, but there is a difference between just a one-off and, because the year after they had a one seed, and in 2023-24, Kansas was preseason number one after getting Hunter Dickinson from Michigan, and they had some breakout stars like Johnny Furphy, who's now in the NBA with the Pacers. Senior year from Kevin McCullough, with KJ Adams, Nick Timberlake transfer, another year from Dajuan Harris. This Kansas team was number one, and it started off at this point last year they were they were 21-6, 20-6 I guess, but they started the year 21-6, number 9 team in they got up to 7 in the country, but they ended the year losing 5 of their last 7 games, losing to Cincinnati in the second round, rather, in the Big 12 tournament, and then losing to Gonzaga in the round of 32. That was a pretty bad fall off from being the number one team in the country. And there were a lot of Kansas fans who were saying, well, this year's going to be different because we're going to have a lot more depth, especially with Zeke Mayo, and who's in his defense has played really well. Rylan Griffin, his transfer from Alabama, has had some really good games, And AJ Storr, great player at Wisconsin, has not played well at all in Lawrence. And again, with the return of Hunter Dickinson and Dajuan Harris, the freshman in Flory Bidunga, who is probably one of their best. They're probably their best front court player right now. If I had to say, KJ Adams, definitely, but he's definitely better than KJ Adams right now. And look, to Kansas's credit, they got some big wins. They have a win over Duke, who's one of the best teams in the country, on a neutral floor. Michigan State is looking like a really, really, really good team this year, right now at least. And they have a win over Michigan State. Like, granted, it was early on, and Michigan State was, not the same team, but they definitely got a lot better. And Kansas has a win over them. They had a win over then number 9 North Carolina, but since then, Kansas, their best win since that stretch was at home against Iowa State, who again did not have Milan Momcilovic, and Kansas has a loss to Houston at home and has played pathetically on the road. Since beating TCU, they are now 0-4 on the road, and that includes a loss to Baylor where they blew a 21-point lead. That also includes losing to Kansas State, who pretty much led Kansas the whole way. Same thing against Utah, and then against BYU, they were just a no-show. And regardless of if they beat Oklahoma State or not, they should beat Oklahoma State, one of the worst teams in the Big 12, but they're probably going to be unranked. First time that would happen in 2 years since North Carolina was unranked. I think the previous team to do that, and one that I was going to talk about, was and they saved themselves with a national title game appearance, but Kentucky in 2013, 2014, where they had Julius Randle and the Harrison twins and James Young and Willie Cauley-Stein, they went from preseason number 1 with one of the best recruiting classes ever to completely out of the rankings. They just I think they got blown out by that Florida team that had like Patrick Young and Scotty Wilbekin and Michael Frazier, all those guys. Casey Prather, Dorian Finney-Smith was on that Florida team. So yeah, Kentucky was playing pretty badly at that time, and then once tournament time started, they beat that undefeated Wichita State team, and then they beat Louisville and Michigan and Wisconsin. They just, especially with Aaron Harrison making all those 3-pointers, they had that magical tournament run, but UConn ended up beating them in the national title game. And that they saved themselves there, because otherwise they would have been one of the most, not only one of the worst, but one of the most disappointing preseason number 1s. But again, they saved themselves. Another team, number 1 preseason, was Kansas, again in 2018-2019, where they had guys like LeGerald Vick and no, not LeGerald Vick. Right? Or am I thinking? Wait. Yeah, he left the team during the season. That's right. Yeah. So LeGerald Vick left the team during like the middle of the season, and that pretty much derailed them. Ochai Agbaji was also on that team. KJ Lawson and Dedrick Lawson were also on that team. Quentin Grimes as well. And yeah, after starting the year 10-0, they had some pretty. They did not end up playing very well. This was the year that snapped their 14 consecutive Big 12 title race, and they ended up losing in the round of 32 to Auburn, who later made the Final Four. And a couple other teams, definitely, we wouldn't be talking about preseason number 1 teams without mentioning the 1987-88 Syracuse Orange team after Syracuse lost to Indiana in the 1987 national title game off the Keith Smart jumper. As an Indiana fan who wasn't even alive back then, it's still really cool to go back and watch that. But that's one of the worst preseason number 1s. I think they ended up losing in like the round of 32 as well. I think they lost. Who did they lose to? Rhode Island, I want to say. Also, one of the, I think it was after one of the UConn teams. I believe this was in, oh God, what year was this? Was it 2000. It was one of the years where Rip Hamilton on was still on can or on UConn's team. So yes. So or no, uh, maybe this was after he graduated. Yeah, it must have been. Yeah. So, but they were still ranked number one. Uh, I could have sworn. Okay, my memory must be just failing me. So, yeah, UConn was ranked number one, but then ended up losing to Tennessee in the round of 32. I mean that's it's hard to get much worse than that as well. I mean North Carolina certainly did. So, um, but then I also wanted to mention, I believe here where Kansas also had another pretty bad. This was under Roy Williams. I think this was the year before they won the national. No, wait, no. I'm thinking of North Carolina. Uh, my memory, like I'm trying to remember, like off the top of my head, like God, 2004, 2005. Is that what I'm thinking of? Yes. Okay, so Kansas was ranked number one. No, this was the second year in Bill Self's tenure. And Kansas started the year number one, and then Kansas has appeared on this list quite a bit, and then ended up going 12-4 in the Big 12, or the Big 12, and then lost to Bucknell in the first round, 64-63. So yeah, Kansas is on this list a lot, man. This is like that's incredible. Um, but yeah, more times than not, the preseason number ones have been fantastic, fantastic. Um, you obviously have preseason number ones like the 2014-15 Kentucky Wildcats team, 38-0 before losing to Wisconsin in that Final Four. You have, hell, even the last time Indiana was ranked number one, they still had a one seed in the NCAA tournament. Like, they had a disappointing finish against Syracuse in a game that I didn't really want to bring up again, but here we are. So, anyway. But yeah, with that, like, I mean, also, I think it was the year, not the NC State team that won the '83 title where Jim Valvano was running around the court, but I think it was the title before that, after they won their first title. I think it was in the '70s, where NC State was preseason number one, and they ended up having a pretty bad year. I think I'll have to recheck that, but regardless, like that's some of the like. But what I'm trying to like get at, like more importantly than anything, is like a lot of preseason number ones. If there are disappointing years, they're usually like spread out pretty well, and the fact that like three of the like most disappointing preseason number ones have come in back to potentially back seasons, like because this season for Kansas is still going on, but like they look still pretty bad. So yeah, it's really just incredible. Like as I've said before, this Kansas team looks worse than last year's team, and everyone thought it was going to be the opposite. And boy, has that turned out to be very much incorrect. So anyway, um, yeah, let's talk. Yeah, let's get to a little bit of women's basketball action before I wrap up here. Notre Dame defeated Duke 64-49. Sonia Citron had 15 points. Yeah, I don't have a ton to say about this particular game because Duke, when they're not scoring, can have a lot of games like this. They had that style of game against North Carolina. I know North Carolina's defense is really good, but like Duke especially, just that can have a lot of games like that. And Notre Dame certainly, as the new number one, is yeah, they're looking pretty good. Ohio State, Indiana will play Ohio State next in Assembly Hall. Big game for Indiana coming up. That pretty much for me I think it decides whether or not Indiana gets in the tournament. We'll still see on that one though. But Ohio State has now they've beaten Minnesota and Iowa in back-to-back games, but they've both gone into overtime at home, despite Lucy Olson for Iowa having 27 points. I think she hit the game-tying free throws to send it into overtime. Ohio State ends up pulling out and wins 86-78. So another win for them. Definitely, are playing it a little bit closer than a lot of people, more than people would like. I still like this Ohio State squad. A team with Cody McMahon on it is still really, really good. And Jeloni Cambridge as well. 29 points for Cambridge, 25 points for Cody McMahon. One of the best 1-2 combos in the entire country, in my opinion. And then Kennedy Cambridge at 16 off the bench. So Ohio State has plenty of scoring opportunities. They just sometimes don't put it all together. But in the Big 12, one of the more intriguing conferences on the women's side, West Virginia defeated Kansas State, 17th ranked West Virginia, beating 12th ranked Kansas State 70-57. JJ Quinterly had 26 points and 3 steals, one of the better defenders in the Big 12 on the whole. So, yeah, great win for West Virginia, trying to keep pace in the Big 12 race. And yeah, we'll see what ends up happening there. Alabama crushed Texas A&M 88-49. That's another big win for Alabama in the SEC, even though they're not going to catch teams like LSU or South Carolina or Texas. Alabama's definitely in the next tier of SEC teams. And then Maryland needs more wins like this against Michigan. Michigan's going to be really good in the next couple of years. This is a team that will be really difficult to play. Come next year, come the following year. This year, they're a young team, especially with Silas Swords and Olivia Olson, but they will be back. They'll lose games like this against Maryland on the road, but at the same time, still another really, really good win for Maryland. They needed more wins like this, and especially after they struggled so much a few weeks ago. They need to keep having performances like this, and they'll be fine. Should be fine anyway. So I think right now they're probably on the 6 line, maybe the 5, with how many other really good teams there are. We'll see what ends up happening. So anyway, not really too much else to discuss. I mean, UCLA will be playing tomorrow against Illinois. That will be a really good game to check out. I've already mentioned Ohio State playing at Indiana. Alabama plays at Tennessee. That's going to be for the next tier in the SEC. That'll be another game to watch. Yesterday you had UConn defeating Seton Hall 91-49. Not a surprise. Paige Becker's another really good game with 23 points. UConn right now probably on the 2 line if I had to say my piece there. Creighton defeated St. John's. Creighton easily the second best team in the Big East right now. We'll see. If UConn slips up once, Creighton does have an opportunity being only 1 game back. The problem is I don't think UConn's losing the rest of the way in Big East play. So 65-62 over St. John's, and then TCU defeated Arizona State. So TCU is now 13-2 in the Big 12. I believe, let's make sure I get this right. Yeah, TCU is tied with Baylor for the top of the Big 12 conference, and Baylor also gets a win over Colorado, 84-62. So both of the Big 12 co-leaders are victorious on the road. That is another race to watch out for. And then USC does not have a letdown game. They defeated Michigan State 83-75. Juju Watkins, another fantastic performance with 28 points, 8 rebounds, 3 steals, 3 more blocks, and she is so difficult to play against. And that's, again, Michigan State's not a bad basketball team, but they were simply overmatched in a lot of areas. Especially, I mean, Grace Van Sluten had a really good game with 29 points, but aside from Julia Eieralt, they just really weren't getting much production. And against this USC team, it's really difficult when you're facing Juju and Kiki Iriafen, who also had 24 points in this game. That's really difficult to beat. And they're going to be one of the most dangerous combos in the NCAA tournament. And again, that's just another, like, that's going to be really, really difficult to play. Right now, like, is USC on the one line? Probably. I would probably put them ahead of UConn right now, even though that's difficult to say. Yeah, I don't know. That's a tough call. I right now my ones are Notre Dame, Texas, UCLA, and USC. I would probably have I would probably have UConn and South Carolina on the two line, but that's a really difficult call to make. So I'm glad I don't have to make it. So anyway, yeah, with that being said, I think that will do it for me for this episode. Thank you all very much for listening. For all my new listeners, that's, for any new listeners out there, get used to that. I'm also hoping to have some more guests on in the upcoming. Obviously, with March Madness upcoming, the baseball season is starting in a couple. Well, actually, a little over a month now. Baseball season will officially get going. I mean, spring training will obviously happen, but yeah. With that being said, I think very excited to see where this podcast goes. Enjoy talking college basketball, and appreciate y'all listening. So, again, also, if you want to email the pod at crimsonmiserypod@gmail.com for any questions, comments, any suggestions for any teams you want me to cover, or if you want me to do a deep dive into a certain player, let me know. And other than that, I think that will do it for this episode. So again, thanks so much for listening, and I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.